Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and we got some deep web drama today, ladies and gentlemen. You know what I love about the internet sometimes is like, you can always find insane controversies in like places where you actually least expected it to, okay? And when it comes to the deep web, this is something that I didn't even know was a thing until a few days ago. What I'm talking about today is a United States versus Conrad Rockenhouse. And they might be like, who is this Conrad Rockenhouse fella, Mutahar? So a few days ago on r/Tor, there was an account known as Ad0. Now this account belongs to a user known as Adrienne Rockenhouse, which is obviously the wife of Conrad. So here she writes, my husband Conrad is wrongly incarcerated in a county jail. I'm posting this here because you are one of the few communities that will understand the full technical and political reality of how he ended up there. My husband is a former Tor operator, and at one point, he ran some of the fastest relays and exit nodes in the world. The nightmare began when he refused to help the FBI decrypt traffic from his exit nodes. So to give you an idea of what happens here, right, ladies and gentlemen, I care a lot about internet censorship and our right to free speech. And I think a lot of people just have that belief in general. But to give you an idea, to keep those freedoms, it's not free. It's not something that, just exists. You have to constantly fight for it. What happened over here was apparently the FBI couldn't get her husband to decrypt those notes. So they told a judge he used his graphics driver to access the dark web and jailed him pre-trial for 3 years. Now, this story isn't like a one-side win situation. It actually gets pretty complicated, so I want you to kind of stick with me here. But to give you an idea, I love the deep web. I've browsed it for years. I've made tons of hours of content. I would actually probably wager that out of all of the online content creators that cover the deep web, I probably statistically have the most hours of footage out there. And I'm not saying this is a flex, I've just browsed it for years. And one of the things about my deep web browsing series, if you've actually ever watched it, is that generally I like to show that the deep web isn't this like spooky place the media has made it out to be, where red room torture sessions are everywhere, even though those easily exist on real platforms, like real clear web areas. It's not like a haven for child molesters, even though there are lots of them out there. In fact, a lot of the places you can find on the deep web are actually just goofy websites, these kind of like edgy websites where everyone pretends to be an assassin or whatnot. In fact, I would say if I had to percentage out my deep web browsing series, maybe like 80% of it is just goofy laughs, and the other 20% is this mystery, like spooky horror that the media makes it out to be. But the important thing about the deep web is ultimately, it is the most important tool for people that need privacy and anonymity, people that are journalists in dangerous parts of the world, people that are oppressed by their regimes where they can't exercise free speech. You and I can basically say whatever the fuck we want on the internet if you live in North America, within reason, of course, as long as we're not putting out violent calls to actions. You and I can say whatever the fuck we want. Granted, not everyone will like our speech. Maybe the government won't even like our speech, but we are free to say it. There are parts of the world where you do not have the freedom, which is why Tor is such an important thing. Now, to give you an idea really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, Tor is not something that sort of came out of nowhere. To give you an idea, the Glowies were the ones that came up with it. Tor was a product of the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, part of the United States Navy, where they developed the Onion Router, which is a general approach to securing the routing and traffic flow information for network communications by separating identification of network location from routing. So basically, this is how the government decided and designed a way for us to anonymously communicate with each other over the internet through the Tor network. Now, the way that Tor works in its anonymity is basically producing a crowd large enough for everyone to hide into. If Tor consisted of 10 people maximum, it would be pretty easy to identify who the fuck those 10 people are after a while. But because Tor has millions of users, anybody that runs a exit node or any kind of node is actually a pretty important person to the Tor network. So here they write, the Tor network strength comes from its thousands of global volunteers who run the relays that form its backbones. This is not just an ideological choice, it is essential to the network security. When running an exit relay, it carries potential risks. It is a legal activity in the US, and these volunteers are the reason the network functions. So when an American intelligence officer, soldier, or diplomat uses Tor from a hostile foreign territory, their safety depends entirely on their internet traffic. If you run a node, there's a good chance that someone in your nation, if you're an American, has probably been safe because of your actions, okay? Now, I'm not here to do the America needs you to run a Tor relay, because the story that I'm about to share with you can possibly make it a very scary effort. So to go back to Rockin' House, this is a set of footage that's been uploaded by his wife that recently got posted on the internet for you to watch. So if you go to Adrian's channel right now, you'll notice that in the last 2 weeks, a lot of videos have been posted. So for instance, he is a disabled veteran, and that is his wife, so I assume that's Adrian. And at this point in time, they're just like sort of chilling, they're minding their own business, they're in their fucking house. And here you can see that these Suburbans roll up with what appear to be U.S. Marshal Services. So you can see that they're actually going to get out of their vehicle at this point. They have their hands completely up, okay? And again, you got federal agents ready, pistols drawn, everything is good to go. These people are, without a doubt, absolutely complying. And it gets even scarier because according to the wife, there was a point where canine units were threatened, and he was actually physically assaulted, according to her. Now, if you look at more of the footage, what's interesting about it too is obviously these federal agents don't exactly appear to be completely threatened. Like, yeah, some of them have their guns drawn. Some of them are just walking around, basically looking at the house. None of these people feel like they're actually in a clear and present danger. At least that's what it appears to be through this footage.
For violence, federal. We hold you headed for. He knows what it's for. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. He violated his release because he's an adult. The warrant isn't for you. The warrant is to search his property. There is to a warrant.
What is the warrant for?
From his probation officer.
From who? Which
For violence, federal.
what's the state?
I don't know. It's a federal probation warrant.
I understand. I checked these are
right.
Now, immediately over here, when I'm looking at this argument, the words that I'm picking out are federal probation. And I want you guys to remember that word going in forward, right? Obviously, you know, for me just looking at this footage, I think personally the U.S. Marshals are being a bit too heavy-handed considering that there really, again, doesn't seem to be any clear and present danger at this home. It seems like maybe what they're doing here, the Marshals, is a lot. It's just too much. So when you go to the Rockin' House website, according to Adrian, the actual warrant on the public record was a simple arrest warrant for a fabricated, nonviolent probation violation. So she even provides that right over here. You are commanded to arrest and bring before a U.S. magistrate judge without any unnecessary delay Conrad, who is accused of an offense or violation on the following document filed by the probation officer. So again, it's just order of the court. The offense is briefly described as follows: violation of bond conditions. So again, I want you to remember this because, you know, in a story like this, not everyone is completely innocent. So according to Adrian, what was actually happening over here was in a multi-year saga that had started in the state of Texas. Conrad was a supporter of free speech and online privacy, refused to help federal agents decrypt traffic on Tor exit nodes. He operated these for journalists and activists, and months later, on a pretextual, non-violent computer crime, he was arrested. His 3-year pre-trial detention was triggered by a single, provably false claim. So here they provide a court transcript where, again, they use some wild shit. So you can read this for yourself. But some of the takeaways over here are kind of like this, okay? So in this one section, he doesn't see that he actually downloaded the Tor software because the software technology usually blocks that. So he said that he did see that he was successful in downloading a Linux operating system called Spice. which is not true. Spice, ladies and gentlemen, is a tool that we use in order to look into virtual machines. So for instance, in this virtual machine that I have right here, you can see that in my information, there's something called Display Spice, which is a server that I use in order to see what's going on in the virtual machine. So when I hit play, instead of passing through a graphics card, I'm able to see what this VM is. I'm able to operate this VM with a graphical display because I'm using a Spice mixed with a graphical like display server in order to access this VM. Without Spice, I would not be able to see this Windows virtual machine. So that's effectively the technology right over here. I know it's been a little bit confusing for anybody following this, but that is the technology they're talking about. And again, the mentioning of Linux, Linux is not evil criminal software. It's just an alternative operating system in a world dominated by corporate greed. So in the case of Spice software, it allows connectivity to a remote virtual machine. And so not only can you potentially circumvent the host-based monitoring, but any network-based monitoring that may be occurring. It's an intentional effort to circumvent monitoring based on the logs that I reviewed. So then a question is asked, based on your knowledge of the defendant and his activities in this case, does he possess the knowledge and capability to install this kind of software? And the answer is yeah. So based on the case at hand, throughout the investigation, we identified as unauthorized access or exceeding authorized access in this instant case, or in the indicted case on a Linux or Unix-based server. And this is also indicative of the same kind of capability, the ability to install a virtual machine to utilize Linux-based operating systems. So according to her, and I know there's a lot of things that are being thrown here, but according to Adrian, the case against him began when he was forced to confess to a nonviolent CFAA, which is that computer crime. So just months before the 5-year statutes of limitation was set to expire, the federal government arrests him on the CFAA charge. The family alleges this was a pretext for his refusal to cooperate on the Tor matter. So because he wasn't assisting the FBI, they decided, okay, the statutes are still within reason for this computer crime. Let's fucking arrest Conrad on that because he's not helping us decrypt this internet traffic that we need to look into to break the privacy, allegedly, of the world around him or people that we consider to be bad. Because remember, if it's one thing about Tor, a lot of places that get actually like hacked or, a lot of places that get like sort of taken down by the feds usually happens because the feds might be running an exit node themselves, or the feds might actually have found a vulnerability somewhere that they've exploited. Again, cops have to get lucky, but thankfully in their case, they only really have to get lucky once. So down over here, the lie that triggered detention. Conrad's pretrial detention was triggered after his probation officer submitted a false violation report. She falsely claimed he installed a Linux operating system that wiped their monitoring software. So again, when we get down into it, because of his prior computer crime, he was not supposed to be using a computer outside his mandated usage, right? So what the law enforcement agents were like, wait, he installed this Linux OS that bypassed whatever software we used to spy on the guy. But in reality, she said the software was a standard Spice graphic driver, which is not an operating system. That's true. That he had prior approval to use for his PhD program. Furthermore, the officer used the presence of the Spice server to suggest that Conrad might be accessing dark web websites. The claim that under oath, she had no proof to support. So a documented conspiracy. The false accusation was fueled by a malicious campaign from Conrad's ex-wife, so now we're bringing ex-wives into it. Newly obtained documents show Luster confessing, which is his ex-wife, in a letter to her parents that she had tricks up my sleeve to keep him in jail. Emails show her colluding with Conrad's own attorney to secretly provide damaging letters to the judge and probation officer to prolong his incarceration for her own financial gains. So from 2019 to 2022, based on those false pretenses, Conrad is held for 3 years in a pretrial detention in various counties, both in Texas and Oklahoma, and the lengthy detention was influenced by improper communications from his ex-wife. So why are we kind of talking about this situation now, ladies and gentlemen? Because in 2025, it seems as though Conrad is still going through a lot of bullshit. Conrad, who is apparently 100% medically retired and a disabled combat veteran with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD, is now being the subject of this crazy harassment. And according to this, all of this is due to the fact that Conrad was just simply not opening up the doors for the feds. Now, the thing about the story that immediately had me going is maybe this guy is so principled that he'll spend years in prison, but he just won't let the FBI have access to those Tor exit nodes because he really is somebody that believes in anonymity, he believes in security, he believes in people's privacy, right? By contributing by giving the FBI what they want, you're basically undermining the entire reason that Tor is built in the first place. So maybe that's a super principled guy. Or maybe he's just worried at what's going on. See, for a lot of things on the internet is when you run these exit nodes, I think legally you're allowed to run them through something known as Section 230. So this is the actual legal statute right over here, which I guess protects sites like YouTube, for instance, where they're kind of served as sort of a distributor for information. And really the legal liability is not always on them for anything that is illegally posted, right? Like, for instance, I think legally, if I run a Tor node and somebody sends something illegal through there, as long as I guess I comply, or, you know, I'm not because I'm just like the distributor, because I'm just like the medium that is used, I might be legally safe. It's one of the reasons why sites like YouTube are not directly sued for any violation of DMCA or legal things when it comes to, again, I'm not a lawyer, but that's just kind of the fucking protection that is offered through here. And again, Tor is such a dangerous thing at times, especially to be like a backbone hoster, because you never really know what the fuck is going to happen if the government decides to really go on your ass and prosecute you. So immediately you might be wondering, okay, Muda, is this like a guy that's being like fucking jailed for his right to protect people's speech? And the thing is, I would say on the surface level, if you didn't research everything, probably. But this is where things started getting weird. Like I said, I want you to remember when the cops had started talking about all this monitoring shit, all this pre-trial, all of these like, you know, probational things. Generally, if you're on a probation for something, it's probably because you had a deal. You know, instead of going to jail, you're on a parole thing. And as long as you don't violate certain things on your parole, you should be good. But it seems like Rockin' House might have actually done that. So a bunch of guys on, you know, a bunch of nerds decided to look this up themselves and found some new information. So for instance, one user here says, okay, I think I found the original thing Rockin' House was convicted of. I needed to see why the fuck are the US Marshals so horny for this? Back in 2014, Rockin' House worked for a travel booking company. He was fired. He used stale VPN access to connect back to the company's infrastructure, right? So something they didn't plug up. He detached a skizzy LUN from the server cluster, crashing it. The company, not knowing he was involved, retained him to help diagnose and fix the problem. During the investigation, the company figured out he caused the crash and terminated him again. And then he somehow gained access to their disaster recovery facility and physically fucked up, a bunch of servers. They were down a total of about 30 days and incurred $500,000 in losses. And so he pleaded his case out. So I guess there's some claims that, you know, again, are pretty uncontested. Now, of course, if this is true, this makes it a pretty serious nonviolent computer crimes act, okay? It makes it a pretty serious thing. It makes you understand why the FBI was monitoring this fucking dude the whole time. Now, when I talked about that, when I played the clip of the marshal screaming about the parole violation, it starts to make a little bit more sense, right? Because according to, again, a story that was also obtained via Pacer, so court documents as well, there were a couple violations in that warrant. So one of them was admitting to using cannabis during supervised release, which that just should not happen, okay? Don't do that. Failing to make scheduled restitution payments and to cooperate with the financial investigation that sets those amounts, falling out of contact with his probation officer, which is a severe no-no, opening several new lines of credit, using an unauthorized iPhone, because again, part of his condition to be out was all of his fucking phones, computers had to have monitoring software, so they would just know that this guy wasn't going back to doing fucked up shit. Now, the thing you have to understand about the CFAA is that even things that are benign, like for instance, if it's really easy to hack into something, it doesn't necessarily exonerate you from like a serious crime. Remember, the most important thing about these laws are intents of your crime, right? Like if it's easy to hack into somebody's computer and like steal their like personal information or fucking crypto money or whatever, you're still liable for like pretty serious fraud and criminal acts, even if hacking somebody was easy. Just because a door is open, just because like I leave my door unlocked, for instance, or my car door unlocked, doesn't give you the right to sort of break and enter or steal my property, right? Like you get what I'm saying here? So that kind of stuff kind of applied over here, and the CFAA was pretty fucking paramount. Now, inside this entire situation, there's been some pretty spooky scenarios, for instance, where, like, apparently, according to some of the users who read the Pacer documents, there was apparently, like, him looking into possibly Googling the term NAMBLA, for instance. But apparently, further down into it, it also appeared that maybe this was somebody that looked into, like, a satire website like Encyclopedia Dramatica and sort of got that idea out that way. Now, if this is true at all, the last thing you want to be doing when the feds are monitoring your computer because of a court order over something you did and agreed to, by the way, the last thing you should be doing is looking up North American Man-Boy Love Association. If the feds raid you for looking up shit like this or use it against you while you're being monitored, I mean, there's just no way to say that you're a complete and utter fucking buffoon. Again, if this is true. But this guy isn't as innocent as the wife had posted, right? This guy is somebody that agreed to being monitored, and because he's now dabbling in virtual machines and ways to circumvent that monitoring, that's why the marshals are so horny for this guy. But I don't even agree with how excessive they are. I'm just giving you guys a full, complete side of the story. But look, the ultimate point that I wanted to look into it was the government using this as some vector to silence this man from like hosting his free speech exit nodes? Actually, no. And this doesn't really serve as a reason for anybody to really worry about, I guess, hosting a node, because the node wasn't the issue. The issue was, according to his court transcripts, it was the fact that he was apparently violating his monitoring. That was it. It was like it's kind of like fucking with like your ankle bracelet or something. It's gonna piss any law enforcement agency off. When you've agreed to be monitored, you're gonna be fucking monitored. So apparently they said that, when it came to the monitoring, the way that it's enforced is the defendant has to download a program, basically a spying malware, to look on everything on your device, okay, just to see what the fuck you're doing. So him accessing the deep web, okay, as a way to obfuscate what he's doing is already a violation. So even inside the actual case, when I was reading it for myself, according to even the agents, they corrected that Spice server stuff to begin with. So realistically, what the story kind of boils down to, it seems, is they basically hit him on a previous offense. He pleaded out, even agreed to pay over $500,000 in criminal restitutions. And any time that, the FBI was or any agency that was looking into him, the moment he fired up a Linux virtual machine and accessed the deep web, which is pretty similar to how I access the deep web for recording, the key difference was that was ultimately basically was a tipping point to say, listen, this guy's just trying to bypass his fucking monitoring. So that's why the FBI or the marshals were that fucking heavy-handed on it. Now, again, there's a lot more to this too that comes with how he was handled. Nobody, in my opinion at least, should be held pre-trial for 3 years. I think that everyone has a right to a speedy and due trial, and I think that, again, this is one of those stories where I told you it was going to get fucking interesting and nobody was going to be the quote-unquote good guy. Because it seems like the truth is somewhere in the middle of this, right? Conrad is not, I would imagine, an evil person, but he is somebody that had a prior conviction that put a lot of scrutiny onto him. But again, the FBI or the Gestapo in this case weren't necessarily on his ass because he wasn't giving up people's free speech. Ultimately, I would say that there probably is a bit of leveraging of a prior conviction just to sort of muscle on this guy. But it's also just as likely that this guy wasn't exactly following his terms of, bail well enough. He wasn't following his parole conditions. So this is where I have a bit of an issue with this entire portrayal, right? Now, looking into the actual transcript, again, provided, you can actually see that the feds in this case were pretty willing to not just immediately misrepresent everything. So they even say it in this part that when asked, right? if this virtual machine was used, is it installed primarily to avoid monitoring? And even, the answer here was no, a VM can be used for legitimate reasons. There's many reasons to use a VM, many legitimate ones. But in this case, if you're trying to circumvent monitoring capability, you could install a VM to do that. This guy was literally playing around with software to help bypass his monitoring. That was the issue at hand. It wasn't that the feds, and remember, we only are hearing it from one side, that the feds want a Tor relay accessed. So realistically, this I feel is now become a story where it's misrepresented from the people presenting it, and very blatantly so. You can read these court documents for yourself. So I'm not here to defend the FBI necessarily, or the marshals, or whatever. I'm sure there's truth somewhere in the middle. But what I can't absolutely defend is the pure innocence that is being portrayed over here. There is no victim in this story. I mean, there is a victim, but to be fair, it's a victim of their own making to some extent. But yeah, guys, this is a massive drama in the deep web circle, and I wouldn't be surprised if Netflix has a documentary on this shit in about a year, where they get pretty much every representation of the facts kind of mixed up. But hopefully, if that time comes, you all watching can say, you heard it here first, or hopefully you did. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.